The smoke alarms malfunctioned. We tried to save her, they told the firefighters. But the 911 recording caught my screams. They nailed my windows. I can't get out. They want me to die. When investigators found the fresh hammer marks. Imagine waking up to the smell of smoke, your eyes stinging, the air suddenly thick and hot. Your childhood home, the place that should have been your sanctuary, is engulfed in flames. Panic rips through you, but then you try to escape your bedroom, and the true horror sets in. Every single window nailed shut. Your parents, the people who were supposed to protect you, had locked you in to die. That desperate 911 call, choked with smoke and raw terror, was the only thing that saved my life, and it finally shattered the perfect facade my family had meticulously constructed for years. From the outside, we were the quintessential American dream. My mother, Susan, always looked impeccable, volunteered at church, and hosted the most beautiful neighborhood gatherings. My father, Harold, was a respected accountant, coached Little League, and always had a friendly wave for everyone. Our house in suburban Minnesota was flawless, with an award-winning garden. I was their only child, and people constantly told me how incredibly lucky I was to have such wonderful parents. But behind that glossy white front door, life operated under a completely different set of rules. I was only 7 when I first sensed something was off. I'd invited a friend over, and before she even arrived, my mother sat me down and gave me a precise script. Exactly which rooms we could enter, which toys were acceptable, what topics were appropriate. When my friend innocently asked to see my bedroom, my mother interjected with a tight, unyielding smile, declaring certain areas of the house private. By age 10, I understood that my entire life was meticulously controlled. My wardrobe chosen by my mother. Haircuts, precise 6-week intervals. Lunches identical every day. Friends vetted thoroughly and playdates monitored from a careful distance. "We just want to protect you, Amber," my mother would say, her voice soft but her eyes like steel. "The world is full of dangerous people. You are precious to us." I vividly remember the first time I discovered my bedroom window was locked. I was 10. It was a beautiful spring day, and I just wanted to feel the breeze. But the window wouldn't budge. My father explained they'd installed special safety locks. "To keep bad people out," he said, ruffling my hair, "and to keep our curious little girls safe inside." At the time it made sense. I believed them. I believed everything they did was for my protection, even when it felt strange or restrictive. What did I have to compare it to? In school, I was an academic machine. My parents demanded perfect grades and I delivered. Teachers praised my intelligence, but they never saw the panic that would seize me over anything less than an A. Knowing the silent disappointment waiting for me at home. Extracurriculars were forbidden, unnecessary distractions, too dangerous, questionable influences, interfering with sacred family dinner. My father rarely contradicted my mother. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with sad eyes, but when I asked what was wrong, he'd quickly smile and say, "Nothing, sweetie. Just thinking about how fast you're growing up." When I was 13, I finally got to visit a classmate's house, Sarah's, for a school project. It was the first time my mother had allowed me to go anywhere without inspecting it first, but Sarah's parents were both doctors with impeccable reputations, and that seemed to satisfy her criteria. At Sarah's house, I watched in genuine amazement as she casually opened the fridge for snacks without asking permission. She played music in her room with the door closed. She mentioned going to soccer practice later, and her mother simply nodded and told her to have fun. On the ride home, I sat silently in the back seat. A new terrifying understanding began to form. My family was not like others. This level of control wasn't protection. It was something else. But I pushed the thought away, telling myself they just loved me more. That night, I tried to open my bedroom window again, truly curious about that lock. I discovered it wasn't just locked. It was sealed. I saw evidence of some kind of adhesive around the edges. As I pressed my face against the glass, looking down at our perfectly manicured lawn, a strange sensation twisted in my stomach. Not just the trapped feeling I'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper. Something like dread. "Mom," I asked at breakfast the next morning, trying to sound casual, "why is my window sealed shut?" She didn't look up from arranging fruit on my plate in a perfect geometric pattern. "We had a problem with drafts. The heating bill was outrageous last winter." It was June. We hadn't used the heating system in months, but I nodded, ate my perfectly arranged breakfast, and pretended to accept the explanation. That was the first time I consciously recognized my mother was lying to me. It wouldn't be the last. As I entered my teenage years, the lies multiplied, and so did the restrictions. Each one presented as a loving gesture, each one tightening the invisible cage around me. By 15, my desperate desire for independence clashed violently with their escalating control. Other teenagers were negotiating curfews and dating privileges. I was fighting for the basic right to walk to the mailbox alone. My mother installed a tracking app on my phone, monitoring my location every minute. If I deviated even slightly from my approved routes between home and school, my phone would immediately ring. "Where are you?" my mother would demand without even a greeting. "The app shows you're 2 blocks from your usual path." The first time I'd stopped to pet a neighbor's dog. The second, I ducked into a store to escape a sudden rain shower. After the third violation, my father began driving me everywhere, eliminating even those small moments of autonomy. At 16, I made a chilling discovery. Cameras. They were everywhere in our house, not obvious ones but tiny devices hidden in smoke detectors, picture frames, even my desk lamp. I found the first one accidentally changing a light bulb. My hand shook as I examined the tiny lens, my mind racing to recall all the private moments that had been observed without my knowledge. When I confronted my parents at dinner that night, my mother's reaction was bone-chilling. "You wouldn't need to be monitored if we could trust you," she said calmly, continuing to cut her chicken into precise, identical pieces. "Your behavior has been concerning lately. Your father and I have discussed having you evaluated." "Evaluated for what?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "For wanting privacy? For being a normal teenager." My father cleared his throat. "Your mother thinks you might be developing some psychological issues, Amber. The secret of behavior, the mood swings. We're worried about you." It was the first time they had openly suggested there was something wrong with me, but it quickly became their favorite tactic. Any resistance to their control was framed as evidence of mental instability. Any request for normal teenage freedoms was interpreted as a troubling sign. My mother started telling extended family members I was struggling emotionally, implying to neighbors I had behavioral problems. She even scheduled appointments with our family doctor, describing symptoms I never experienced, speaking about me as though I wasn't sitting right beside her. "She has these episodes," my mother would say, her voice lowered with practiced concern. "Irrational outbursts, paranoid thoughts. We're at our wits' end." I tried to defend myself, to explain I was fine, just increasingly frustrated. But my protests only reinforced their narrative. I was troubled and in denial. Around this time, the window security in my bedroom intensified. The simple locks were replaced with elaborate mechanisms that required keys my parents kept. Metal bars were installed, cleverly disguised as decorative elements, but functioning just like prison bars. The curtains were replaced with heavy versions that blocked all natural light, which my mother claimed would help me sleep better. It was Jessica, my lab partner in chemistry class, who first truly saw what was happening. We'd become friends despite my limited social interactions, bonding over our shared love of science. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, my flinching at loud noises, my reluctance to discuss home life. "Amber, are you okay?" she asked one day after class. "Like really okay? Because sometimes you act like someone who is afraid all the time." The simple question broke something open inside me. In that empty classroom, smelling of chemicals and chalk, I told her everything. The control, the surveillance, the accusations of mental instability, the locked windows. Jessica listened, her eyes widening. "That is not normal," she said finally. "That is not parents being protective. That is abuse." Hearing the words spoken aloud was both terrifying and incredibly validating. Abuse, I'd always thought, happened in homes with shouting and violence, not in perfectly maintained houses with church volunteering mothers and little league coaching fathers. But as Jessica helped me research psychological abuse and controlling behavior, I recognized our family in every description. Jessica tried to help. She offered to tell her parents, to help me contact authorities. But my mother discovered our deepening friendship with stunning efficiency. She contacted the school counselor, expressing concerns about Jessica's influence on her vulnerable daughter. She spoke with Jessica's parents, painting me as troubled and unstable. Within weeks, Jessica was no longer my lab partner, and her parents had forbidden her from spending time with me. I was 17 when I made my first escape attempt. I had secretly saved money from the meager allowance my parents provided, carefully researching bus routes and youth shelters. One night, I packed a small bag and waited until the house was silent. I climbed out my bedroom window, having spent weeks carefully loosening the newest security measures without detection. I made it 3 miles before my father's car pulled alongside me. He didn't speak as I got in, my small bag clutched to my chest. At home, my mother was on the phone with the police, tearfully reporting that her mentally disturbed daughter had run away during an episode. "She's not well," I heard her saying. "We've been trying to get her proper help. We're so worried she might hurt herself." The next day, my bedroom door had a new lock installed. This one was on the outside. My window was completely sealed with a material I couldn't identify. And my parents began giving me pills each morning and evening, insisting they were prescribed by a doctor I had never met. "For your anxiety, sweetheart," my mother would say, watching to ensure I swallowed them, to help keep those troubling thoughts under control. The medication left me groggy and disoriented. Concentrating became difficult. My school performance, once excellent, suffered. Teachers who had praised my intelligence now looked at me with concern, but accepted my mother's explanation of medication adjustment for a condition I didn't have. By my senior year, the narrative of my instability was firmly established in our community. I was the troubled girl with the saintly parents who sacrificed everything to care for their challenged child. People looked at me with pity or discomfort. No one questioned why I was never seen without parental supervision, why I no longer participated in class discussions, why I seemed to disappear further into myself with each passing month. The pills, the isolation, the constant surveillance, the locked doors and windows, they all served the same chilling purpose. To convince me that I needed their protection from the world and from myself. To break down any sense that I could exist independently from their control. But deep inside, a small flame of resistance continued to burn. I started secretly spitting out the pills when no one was watching. I read books on psychological abuse, hidden inside approved school texts. I documented everything in a journal, concealed inside a hollowed-out dictionary, a hiding place inspired by a novel I'd read years earlier. I graduated high school in a fog of medication and isolation, with no friends and no plans for college. My parents announced I would be taking a gap year to focus on my health, which really meant another year under their complete control. As my classmates prepared for independence, I prepared for more intensive confinement. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, but with no practical means to exercise my freedom. The world outside our house had become an abstract concept, not a place I could actually access. But still, that flame inside me refused to die completely. At 21, my life bore no resemblance to what most young adults experience. While peers were finishing college, starting careers, or traveling, I existed within the suffocating confines of my parents' control. The only concession to my adulthood was permission to take online classes through a local community college, a program my mother selected and monitored closely. "See how we support your education, Amber?" she'd say, checking my computer history daily. Most parents wouldn't invest so much in a child with your challenges. The challenges she referred to were entirely their creation, a narrative so thoroughly established that even I sometimes questioned my own perceptions. Was I really unstable? Did I truly need the protection they insisted upon? The doubt was by design, a product of years of gaslighting and isolation. But during my online psychology class, I encountered information about emotional abuse that resonated deeply. I began to understand the tactics my parents employed. Isolation, gaslighting, control, monitoring, medication. During lectures, I would mute my computer and silently cry, recognizing my life in the clinical descriptions of abuse victims. My professor, Dr. Matthews, noticed my exceptional work on assignments related to family dynamics and psychological control. During a required video conference, she asked questions that suggested she sensed something beneath my careful responses. I was terrified of saying too much, knowing my mother often stood just outside my door during these calls. But Dr. Matthews seemed to understand. "Amber," she said casually at the end of our call, "there are resources available for young adults transitioning to independence. I'll email you some information. Some of my students find it very helpful." The email contained links about domestic abuse, hidden within resources about scholarship opportunities. I understood immediately. She suspected my situation. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I began a secret plan. My online transcription job, approved by my parents because it could be monitored and didn't require leaving the house, paid me directly to a PayPal account. I diverted small amounts to a secret bank account, created using information from one of Dr. Matthews' resource links. I researched domestic violence shelters and memorized phone numbers, unable to write them down for fear of discovery. In those months, I also formed my first real connection with a neighbor. Lauren Davis, a young nurse who worked night shifts, moved into the house next door. She'd wave to me when I was allowed into the backyard for supervised fresh air, noticing how my mother hovered during these brief outdoor moments, how my father always checked the perimeter of our property before I was permitted outside. One day, Lauren approached our fence while my mother was distracted by a phone call. "Is everything okay with you?" she asked quietly. "I don't mean to intrude, but something seems off." Before I could respond, my mother was beside me, her arm around my shoulders in what would appear to be an affectionate gesture, but felt like a restraint. "Amber has some special needs," my mother told Lauren with practiced sympathy. "We have to be very careful with her. Behavioral issues, you understand." Lauren nodded politely, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe my mother, and that small moment of recognition gave me hope. Over the following weeks, I managed to slip Lauren notes through a loose board in the fence during my supervised outdoor time. Brief messages explaining my captivity, begging for help. Lauren responded, leaving tiny folded papers in the same gap. She believed me. She was willing to help. We developed a plan for her to contact authorities with my detailed accounts of abuse. But my parents discovered our communication. I never learned how, whether it was surveillance footage from one of their hidden cameras or simply my mother's constant vigilance. One evening, my father entered my room holding one of Lauren's notes. "Who is trying to take you away from us, Amber?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Who has been feeding your delusions?" That night they took everything. My computer, my phone, even the books from my online classes. My father installed deadbolts on my bedroom door. This time not even pretending they were for any purpose other than keeping me confined. And that is when I discovered them nailing my windows shut. I woke to the sound of hammering late at night. Creeping to my bedroom door, I peered through the crack to see my father methodically driving nails through the window frame in the hallway. When he finished, he applied some kind of sealant around the edges. Harold, make sure they're secure, my mother whispered. She's been planning something. I can feel it. This feels extreme, Susan, my father replied, his voice hesitant for perhaps the first time I could remember. She's our daughter. She's sick, my mother hissed. She'll run away and end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Everything we do is to protect her from herself. Do you want her blood on your hands? The next morning, I confronted them at breakfast, abandoning the compliant persona I had maintained as protective camouflage. I saw you nailing the windows shut, I said, my voice shaking. Why are you doing this? My mother's face showed no surprise, only calm resolution. To protect you from yourself, Amber. Your recent behavior shows you're having another episode. What happens if there's a fire? I asked. How would I get out? We would save you, my father said, not meeting my eyes. We always take care of you. You are imprisoning me, I said. My mother's smile was chilling. We are saving you. Someday you will understand. After that confrontation, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food was strictly controlled, served in small portions at irregular times. Bathroom visits were supervised. The door required to remain partially open. The medication increased. New pills with stronger effects that left me disoriented and nauseated. I heard my mother on the phone with someone, discussing residential treatment facilities. I understood with horrifying clarity that they were planning to institutionalize me, to transfer their home prison to a more official one where their narrative of my mental instability would be accepted without question. Lauren tried once more to help. I heard her arguing with my parents on the front porch, threatening to call the police. My mother's response was practiced and perfect. We appreciate your concern for our daughter, she said with convincing sincerity. But Amber has serious psychological issues that require specialized care. The police are well aware of her condition. In fact, Officer Reynolds has been wonderfully supportive of our situation. Would you like his number? It was a bluff but an effective one. Lauren retreated, but I could see from my window that she watched our house more intently. Her curtains often parted, her presence visible at her windows at odd hours. My health began to deteriorate from stress, insufficient nutrition, and the side effects of unnecessary medication. I lost weight. My hair began to fall out. Sleep was elusive, broken by nightmares when it came at all. Yet, despite my weakened state, my resolve strengthened. I understood with perfect clarity that I needed to escape or I would die in that house, either from their direct actions or from the slow poison of captivity. I had one remaining lifeline. A prepaid phone I had purchased during a rare supervised shopping trip months earlier, before they had completely restricted my movements. I had hidden it inside a heating vent in my room, only using it when absolutely certain I was unobserved. The battery was low and I had no charger, but I preserved it for an emergency. I didn't know then how soon that emergency would come, or that it would arrive in the form of flames and smoke that would nearly claim my life. The night that changed everything began ordinarily enough. My parents conducted their usual evening routine, checking locks, administering my medication, securing me in my room for the night. I pretended to swallow the pills, but tucked them under my tongue, spitting them into a tissue once alone. It was a small act of defiance that kept my mind clearer than they intended. I fell into a restless sleep around 11, only to wake suddenly at 2 in the morning to an unusual sound from downstairs. At first, I thought it might be my father doing one of his middle-of-the-night security checks. He sometimes roamed the house at odd hours, testing windows and doors, checking surveillance equipment. But this sound was different. A crackling noise followed by a muffled pop. I sat up in bed, straining to identify it. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Faint at first, then increasingly acrid. My first reaction was oddly calm. Fire drills had been part of school life, and the procedure was ingrained. Get low. Find an exit. Call for help. I slid out of bed and crawled to my bedroom door, already feeling the temperature rising. When I touched the doorknob, it was warm but not hot. I turned it, expecting to enter the hallway and find my parents perhaps already managing the situation. The knob turned but the door would not open. I pushed harder, then realized with a surge of raw panic that it was locked from the outside. Not just the regular lock that had become standard, but something more. I could feel resistance when I pushed, as though something heavy had been braced against it. Mom! Dad! I called out, my voice higher than normal. There's a fire. I can't get out. No response came. I pressed my ear to the door and heard movement downstairs. The sound of voices too indistinct to make out words. I pounded on the door, shouting louder. Help! The house is on fire. I'm locked in. The smoke was thickening now, seeping under my door in ominous tendrils. I grabbed a towel and stuffed it into the gap, but it provided only temporary relief. My eyes began to sting, my throat tightening. I moved to the window, the most logical escape route. My room was on the second floor, but the garage roof extended beneath my window, providing a possible path to safety. I grasped the window sash and pulled upward, already anticipating the resistance of the locks my parents had installed years ago. But this was different. The window did not budge at all. In the dim light from my bedside lamp, I could see why. Fresh nails had been hammered through the frame at intervals of just a few inches, securing it completely to the casing. Some sort of industrial sealant had been applied around the edges, visible as a dark outline. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my desk chair and slammed it against the window, but the reinforced glass merely shuddered. Again I struck and tiny cracks appeared, but the window held firm. The nails remained embedded in the wood, unmoved by my desperate efforts. The smoke was getting thicker. I could hear the fire now, a hungry roar from downstairs. The floor beneath my feet was growing hot. I dropped to my hands and knees, remembering that air would be clearer near the floor. And then I heard it. Car doors slamming outside. I crawled back to the window and peered out. In the driveway, illuminated by security lights, I saw my parents getting into our family sedan. They were leaving. They were leaving me in a burning house. In that moment, the truth I had been trying not to acknowledge for years crystallized with perfect, horrifying clarity. This was not an accident. This was not neglect. This was intentional. The sealed windows, the locked door, their hasty departure. They wanted me to die in this fire. I began screaming. The raw sounds of terror and betrayal tore at my smoke-irritated throat. I pounded the window, threw myself against the door, searched frantically for anything that might break through my wooden prison. Through my panic, I remembered the phone. My emergency lifeline, hidden in the heating vent. I scrambled across the room, prying open the metal grate with fingers already blistering from the rising heat. The small phone was there, miraculously still showing a partial charge. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, coughing violently as smoke filled my lungs. 911. What is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was so calm, a jarring contrast to my surroundings. Fire. I gasped. I'm trapped. 622 Maple Street, second floor bedroom. I can't get out. Is there a fire in your home? The dispatcher asked. Are there other people in the house? Yes, fire. I confirmed, my voice breaking. No people. My parents left. They locked me in. The windows are nailed shut. I cannot get out. There was a brief pause, as though the dispatcher was processing this impossible information. Did you say the windows are nailed shut? Yes. I screamed, abandoning any attempt at composure. They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die. I heard sirens in the distance as the dispatcher assured me help was coming. The smoke was so thick now I could barely see across my room. The heat was intense, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. I crawled to the farthest corner from the door, pressing a wet cloth I had grabbed from my bathroom against my mouth and nose. Through the window, I saw emergency lights approaching. I heard someone shouting outside, though the words were indistinct. A new sound caught my attention. Lauren's voice from next door, screaming my name. Amber. Oh my God. Amber. I crawled back to the window, fighting against the thickening smoke, and pounded on the glass. Through watery eyes, I could see Lauren in her yard, pointing frantically toward my window as firefighters arrived. The next few minutes blurred in my oxygen-deprived mind. There was the sound of breaking glass, the rush of fresher air. Figures in protective gear appeared at my window, expressions of shock visible even through their masks as they registered the nails securing my window shut. Strong arms lifted me. Someone was saying something about a ladder. I was being carried. The sensation of movement, disorienting after the confinement of my room. The cool night air hit my smoke-ravaged lungs, causing a coughing fit so violent I thought my ribs would crack. I remember fragments of the next hour. Oxygen being placed over my face, the burn of N4 being inserted. Lauren's tear-streaked face appearing briefly above me, her hands squeezing mine. I remember trying to speak, to explain, but lacking the strength to form coherent sentences. Most vividly, I remember seeing my parents returning to the scene, their performance beginning immediately. My mother's theatrical wail, my father's stunned expression, both rushing toward the ambulance with perfectly practiced concern. Our daughter, my mother cried to anyone who would listen. Is she all right? We just went for help. The smoke alarms malfunctioned. We tried to save her. Through my oxygen mask, I whispered the truth to the paramedic beside me. They locked me in. They nailed the window shut. They left me to die. His expression shifted, skepticism giving way to something darker as he looked from me to my hysterical parents, who were being held back by police officers. He leaned closer. We found the nails, he said quietly. Fresh hammer marks. We saw the lock on your door. No one is going to hurt you anymore. As consciousness faded, I heard a police officer speaking to my parents, his voice hard and suspicious. We need to ask you some questions about those windows, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, and about this recording from the 911 call. My mother's voice rose in practiced indignation. Our daughter is mentally disturbed. She has delusions. We would never harm her. But for the first time in my life, no one was believing her performance. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the unfamiliar but beautiful sound of handcuffs clicking around my mother's wrists. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. My throat was raw from smoke inhalation, my lungs damaged but healing. The first face I saw wasn't my mother's or father's, but Lauren's, sitting beside my bed with dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she had barely left my side. "They're in custody," were her first words to me, answering the question I had not yet found the strength to ask. "Both of them. They are not getting anywhere near you ever again." A police detective named Jason Reynolds came to see me that afternoon, his manner gentle but direct. He sat beside my bed, notepad ready but initially unused, as he simply asked how I was feeling. "I need to ask you some questions, Amber," he finally said. "But first, I want you to know that we found the hammer marks on your window frames. Fresh marks. We found the sealant. We found the lock on your bedroom door, and the furniture that had been pushed against it. The evidence supports your account." I closed my eyes briefly, a strange mixture of relief and pain washing over me. For so long I had been told that my perceptions were wrong, that my memories were unreliable, that my fears were delusions. Having external validation of the reality I had experienced was both vindicating and devastating. Detective Reynolds was patient as I shared my story, beginning with my earliest memories of control and isolation, working through the escalating restrictions of my teenage years, and finally describing the horrifying realization that my parents had left me to die in a fire they likely started themselves. "We can't prove yet that they set the fire deliberately," he told me. "The fire investigator says it started in the kitchen, possibly electrical, but we can prove they knew about it, left without attempting to rescue you, and had taken deliberate steps to prevent your escape. They've been telling people I'm mentally ill for years," I said, my voice still raspy from smoke damage. "That I have delusions, that I'm unstable and need their protection. Will anyone believe me?" Detective Reynolds' expression hardened slightly. "The 9/11 recording is compelling evidence, Amber. Your voice, your terror, your clear statement that they had nailed your windows shut, all captured in real time during the emergency. It's difficult to dismiss that as delusion." He hesitated before continuing. "We executed a search warrant on your parents' home, or what remains of it after the fire. We found medication bottles prescribed to you by a doctor who, when interviewed, had no record of you as a patient. We found journals belonging to your mother that," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "strongly suggest a psychological condition that experts will need to evaluate over the coming days." As my physical condition improved, the full scope of the investigation was revealed to me. My mother's journals, partially recovered from a fireproof safe in their bedroom, contained years of detailed documentation of her treatment of my supposed mental illness, a condition that existed only in her mind. Psychologists who reviewed the material suggested she suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy. More chilling were the entries from recent months, where she wrote explicitly about her fear of losing control over me, of my potential escape into the world, and her determination to maintain a grip on my life, whatever the cost. "Your father appears to have been more of an enabler than an instigator," Detective Reynolds explained during one of our interviews. "He admitted knowing what your mother was doing was wrong, but claims he was afraid to contradict her. He has been cooperating with the investigation, providing details about the progression of your confinement." Lauren became a key witness, describing her observations of my restricted movements, the supervised backyard visits, the notes I had passed to her, and her unsuccessful attempts to get authorities to investigate before the fire. She brought forward our written communications, preserved despite my parents' discovery of some of them. "I should have done more," she told me tearfully during one hospital visit. "I knew something was terribly wrong, but I didn't know how to help without making things worse." "You did help," I assured her. "You were the only one who saw through their facade. You were the only one who believed me." Other neighbors came forward as the case gained attention, sharing observations they had dismissed or rationalized over the years. Mrs. Abernathy from across the street recalled how she never saw me outside alone, how my mother would interrupt if she attempted to speak with me directly. Mr. Jensen, who lived 2 doors down, described an incident years earlier when he heard screaming from our house, only to be convinced by my mother that they had been watching a horror movie with the volume too high. My former teachers were interviewed, many expressing shocking guilt at having accepted my parents' explanations for my increasingly withdrawn behavior and declining academic performance. Dr. Matthews, my online psychology professor, provided records of our communications and her own documented concerns about potential abuse. As physical evidence was compiled and witness statements gathered, the prosecution's case against my parents strengthened. The district attorney explained to me that they would be charged with attempted murder, false imprisonment, child abuse for the years before I turned 18, and numerous other crimes. "Your mother's journals are particularly damning," she told me. "They show premeditation and a disturbing lack of remorse. In one entry from just weeks before the fire, she wrote about how she would rather see you dead than independent of her control. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. I had understood on some level that my mother's love was twisted and possessive, but to have confirmation that she had actually contemplated my death was still shocking. As my physical recovery progressed, I began working with a trauma specialist, Dr. Eleanor Simmons, who helped me process not only the acute trauma of the fire, but the lifelong psychological abuse I had endured. For the first time, I could speak freely about my experiences, without fear of being labeled delusional or having my reality denied. What you are describing is gaslighting in its most extreme form, Dr. Simmons explained during one of our sessions. They systematically undermined your trust in your own perceptions, isolated you from anyone who might validate your reality, and created an alternative narrative about your mental state that served their purposes. One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was accepting that the parents I had desperately tried to please, whose love I had craved even amid their abuse, had been willing to let me die rather than lose control over me. Dr. Simmons helped me understand that their behavior reflected their own severe psychological disturbances, not any failure or deficiency on my part. You survived by maintaining an inner core of truth, she told me. Despite years of having your reality denied, you held on to what you knew to be true. That resilience saved your life. 6 weeks after the fire, strong enough to leave the hospital, but with nowhere to go, I moved temporarily into Lauren's spare bedroom. The community that had once believed my parents' narrative about my supposed mental illness now rallied around me. A local law firm took my case pro bono, helping me navigate victim services and the upcoming criminal proceedings. As the preliminary hearing approached, I steeled myself to face my parents in court for the first time since the fire. The evidence against them was substantial, but I knew their ability to present a convincing facade of loving concern. For 29 years they had fooled everyone. Part of me still feared they might do so again. Remember, Detective Reynolds told me the day before the hearing, we have the 911 recording. We have the physical evidence. We have your mother's own writings. And most importantly, we have you alive and able to tell the truth. The truth that had been denied for so long was finally going to be heard. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined from movies and television shows. Polished wood, fluorescent lighting, the slight echo of footsteps on the hard floor. I sat beside the prosecutor, a woman named Julia Winters, who had spent hours preparing me for this moment. Still, nothing could have fully readied me for the sight of my parents entering in handcuffs, looking smaller and older than in my memory. My mother's eyes found mine immediately, her expression a practiced blend of concern and betrayal that I had seen countless times before. My father looked at the floor, shoulders hunched, the embodiment of defeat. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt they had so carefully cultivated in me. Then I remembered the nails in my window frames, the smoke filling my lungs, their car driving away as flames consumed our house with me trapped inside. The preliminary hearing expanded into a full trial that lasted 3 weeks. Evidence mounted day by day. The 911 recording played for the jury, their faces reflecting horror as they heard my desperate screams. Forensic analysis of the window frames showed fresh nails and sealant applied just days before the fire. Medical experts testified about the unnecessary medications I had been given for years. Psychologists explained the patterns of abuse and control evident in my parents' behavior. My mother maintained her performance throughout, insisting to anyone who would listen that she had only ever tried to protect her mentally disturbed daughter. She cried on cue, spoke with perfect maternal concern about my condition, and expressed confusion about why I would fabricate such terrible accusations against parents who loved me so devotedly. Amber has always had a vivid imagination, she testified, dabbing at non-existent tears. As a child, she would tell stories that simply weren't true. As she grew older, the stories became darker, more paranoid. We consulted doctors, tried medication, did everything possible to help her. My father's defense took a different approach. His attorney portrayed him as another victim of my mother's psychological manipulation, a weak man who failed to protect his daughter, but who never actively participated in my imprisonment. He admitted to installing the locks and nailing the windows, but claimed he did so under duress, believing my mother's assertions that I was a danger to myself. I made terrible mistakes, he testified, actually meeting my eyes briefly. I failed Amber. I should have protected her from Susan's obsession. I will regret that failure every day for the rest of my life. The most difficult day of the trial came when I took the stand. Facing my parents while recounting the years of abuse required every ounce of strength I possessed. My voice shook at times, but I forced myself to look directly at them as I spoke my truth. They told me from childhood that I was mentally unstable, that I needed their protection from myself and from the world, I testified. But I was never ill until they began medicating me with drugs I didn't need. I was never in danger until they created the danger. They did not protect me. They imprisoned me. My mother's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to create doubt about my recollections, suggesting that trauma and smoke inhalation had affected my memory of the night of the fire. He implied that my online psychology classes had given me terminology to fabricate a narrative of abuse. Is it possible, he asked with practiced skepticism, that your parents really did try to save you that night, but your oxygen-deprived brain misinterpreted their actions? I looked directly at the jury as I answered. I saw them get into their car and drive away while smoke filled my lungs and flames approached my locked bedroom. My windows were nailed shut. My door was barricaded from the outside. Those are not actions of people trying to save someone. Those are actions of people ensuring someone cannot escape. The turning point came when the prosecution played the full 911 recording for the courtroom. My voice, thin with terror and choked by smoke, echoed through the silent room. They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die. The dispatcher's calm questions, my increasingly desperate responses, the sound of my coughing and struggling to breathe, all captured in real time during the fire, had an undeniable impact. I watched jurors wince. One woman covered her mouth in horror. Even my father closed his eyes, unable to maintain his composure as the recording played. In the silence that followed, my mother did something unexpected. She began to laugh, a soft, unsettling sound that gradually increased in volume until the judge had to call for order. When she spoke, her carefully maintained facade had cracked, revealing something cold and alien beneath. She was always going to leave me, my mother said, no longer performing for the jury, but speaking directly to me. Just like everyone else. I gave her everything. I protected her from the filth of the world, and she wanted to abandon me for a life of independence. She spat the last word like a curse. No one who really loves you gives you independence, Amber. They keep you close. They keep you safe. They keep you. The courtroom fell silent at this chilling confession. My mother seemed to realize her error quickly, attempting to resume her previous demeanor, but it was too late. The jury had glimpsed the truth behind her performance. My father, perhaps sensing the shift in the courtroom, made a decision that surprised everyone. He asked to change his plea to guilty and offered a full confession. He described years of knowing what was happening was wrong, but being too afraid of my mother to intervene. He detailed how they had planned to institutionalize me permanently before I could establish an independent adult life. And he confirmed that on the night of the fire, they had indeed left me to die, driving away with full knowledge that I was trapped inside. Susan said it would be better this way, he testified, his voice barely audible. That Amber would never be happy in the world, that the world would hurt her, that a quick death was preferable to a lifetime of suffering. And I was too much of a coward to stop her. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both my parents. My mother received a sentence of 40 years without possibility of parole. My father, given his cooperation and guilty plea, received 25 years with possibility of parole after 15. Before they were led away, the judge allowed me to make a statement. I stood, my legs shaking slightly, and faced the people who had given me life and then tried to take it away. I spent 29 years believing I was broken, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Believing I needed your protection from myself and from the world. Today I stand before you whole and free. I am not speaking to offer forgiveness. I am speaking to declare my independence from your control, from your lies, from your twisted version of love. This is the last time I will ever address you, and the first day of a life that belongs entirely to me. As they were led away, my mother called out one last time. You will fail without us, Amber. You need us. But her voice held no power over me anymore. The truth had been spoken, heard, and affirmed. Justice, imperfect, but real, had been served. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and media, I felt something unfamiliar spreading through me. It took a moment to recognize it as freedom. Not just physical freedom, but the liberation of having my reality acknowledged and validated after a lifetime of denial. The weight of secrecy and shame had lifted, replaced by the sometimes terrifying, but always precious gift of self-determination. What will you do now? A reporter asked as I prepared to leave. I smiled, the expression still feeling somewhat foreign on my face. I am going to live, I said simply. For the first time in my life, I am going to truly live. The journey from surviving to thriving did not follow a straight line. There were days when freedom felt overwhelming, when I questioned my ability to navigate a world I had been systematically taught to fear. There were nights when I woke in panic, convinced I was still trapped in that burning room. But with each passing month, those moments became less frequent, less intense. Dr. Simmons continued to work with me, helping me process not only the acute trauma of the fire, but the complex psychological impact of lifelong abuse. Recovery is not about forgetting what happened, she explained during one particularly difficult session. It is about integrating those experiences into your understanding of yourself, without allowing them to define your future. Lauren remained a steadfast presence in my life, transitioning from rescuer to roommate to genuine friend. She never pushed me to discuss my experiences, but listened when I needed to talk. She celebrated small victories with me. My first solo trip to the grocery store, my first time driving a car, my decision to finish my degree in psychology. I thought I was brave until I met you, she told me once. You redefine courage for me every day. 6 months after the trial, I moved into my own apartment, a small sun-filled space that I decorated exactly as I wished. The first night alone was terrifying, but I reminded myself that fear was a normal response to new experiences, not evidence that I was incapable of independence, as my parents had claimed. I placed no locks on my bedroom door. Every window could be opened fully. These were not casual choices, but deliberate reclamations of freedom. Each morning I opened all the windows for at least a few minutes regardless of the weather just because I could. The fresh air, even when cold or damp, tasted like liberty. The media attention following the trial brought unexpected connections. Other survivors of family abuse reached out to share their stories in solidarity. Organizations working with domestic violence victims invited me to speak about psychological abuse and coercive control. Gradually, I found purpose in helping others recognize and escape situations similar to what I had experienced. 1 year after the fire, I established a small foundation focusing on helping young adults transitioning out of abusive family situations. We provided practical support, legal resources, and most importantly, community. The isolation that abusers create as their first line of control could be broken through connection with others who understood without explanation. You turned your pain into purpose, Dr. Matthews told me when I invited her to speak at our foundation's first formal event. That is the most powerful form of healing. Not everyone understood my story. Some people still questioned how parents could behave so monstrously, suggesting there must be another explanation. Others implied I should find forgiveness for my own sake, not understanding that for me, freedom from my parents included freedom from any obligation to reconcile with them. I learned to trust my instincts about whom to let into my life. Years of gaslighting had damaged my ability to distinguish between genuine concern and controlling behavior. But with practice and support, my internal warning system grew stronger. I became attuned to red flags. People who pushed boundaries, who questioned my perceptions, who sought to isolate me from others. The most profound lesson I learned was about the nature of love. Real love expands rather than contracts. It creates space for growth rather than confinement. It trusts rather than suspects. It releases rather than restrains. 3 years after the fire, I completed my master's degree in counseling psychology, specializing in trauma recovery. My thesis on psychological abuse within families drew on both personal experience and extensive research. The day I received my diploma, Lauren and a group of friends surprised me with a celebration that left me speechless with gratitude. From surviving to thriving to helping others do the same. Lauren toasted. You are a walking miracle, Amber. But I didn't see myself as miraculous, merely fortunate. Fortunate that Lauren had heard my screams that night. Fortunate that the 911 operator had recorded my desperate words. Fortunate that investigators had found those fresh hammer marks on my window frames. So many abuse victims never get their moment of validation, their chance at justice, their opportunity for a new beginning. Today, my life bears no resemblance to the prison of my first 29 years. I work with trauma survivors, sharing tools for recovery. I travel, experiencing the world my parents insisted was too dangerous for me to enter. I form relationships based on mutual respect, rather than control disguised as protection. The nightmares have not completely disappeared, but they have lost their power to derail my days. The psychological wounds have formed scars that occasionally ache, but no longer bleed. I carry my history not as a burden, but as hard-won wisdom about human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. Perhaps the most powerful realization has been that freedom is not just the absence of physical restraint, but the presence of self-determination. True safety comes not from walls and locks, but from the knowledge that you can trust yourself to navigate whatever challenges arise. Every window in my current home opens fully, without locks or barriers of any kind. That simple fact represents the safety I have created for myself, the safety that comes from within, rather than being imposed from without. On warm summer evenings, I sometimes sit by my open window, feeling the breeze on my face, and acknowledge how far I have traveled from that smoke-filled room with its nailed-shut windows and sealed-off future. If you are watching this and recognize your own life in any part of my story, please know that you are not alone. Trust your perceptions. Document what is happening. Reach out for help, even if previous attempts have failed. Freedom is possible. Healing is possible. A life reclaimed is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care. Good luck.